Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
On today's episode, we're teaming up to explore the decision space of Marvel Snap, a new digital deck construction card game with unique twist. Your deck is only 12 cards. We'll talk about the game's design pedigree, compare it to some beloved board game designs, go over tips and tricks, maybe talk about our favorite decks so far, discuss Marvel Snap's decision space in depth, and also discuss if we recommend it.
Wait. Are we covering Marvel Snap today? That's like a video game, right?
Yes, Jake, we are covering a digital
That
card
can't be
game
right.
on a show in which we've only covered board games today. But I think
Kickball, the sport of kickball.
you're right. I take
in
it
our
back.
least ever downloaded episode, sadly. But you may have missed that
This
one. You could go
episode?
back and listen to it and talk all about kickball and why it's the greatest game ever, possibly.
So Marvel Snap joins the ranks. But I think this fits really well within the sort of purview of our show. No one ever said Decision Space was a show just about games that exist physically. Digital games seem fair, and also Marvel Snap could mostly exist physically.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to talk about the ways in which it achieves some things that wouldn't be possible physically, and why that. I think there's some really cool things going on with that maybe we can touch on a bit later. I was poking fun at this episode, of course, but I do think some people in our audience are probably tuning out this particular episode. That's totally fine. A lot of people play board games specifically because they are an analog experience, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. So, if you're not interested in playing Marvel Snap, no worries. You're still welcome in our interdecisional spaceship. I think you might find some interest in this episode, even if you have no interest in visiting the game. That would be cool too. And the other thing I wanted to say, just it's kind of like a caveat, anticipating some people maybe are going to be less than enthused based on the reaction when we polled our Discord about interest in this type of episode, is that I'm not sure that we've been super clear about our structure and format of the show, but typically what we've been doing is 2 discussion focused episodes and then 2 board game deep dive episodes, usually with a lighter board game and then a heavier board game. So this episode is getting slotted in as like a discussion episode, right? We're still going to have board game content focused episode deep dives coming up. This is not taking the place of that, so don't worry. Everything is fine. You'll be okay. No, just enjoy the show.
Amazing. Caveat City is closed. We're moving on to New York.
New York.
I couldn't think of a Marvel
City.
City. So, New York, here we come. Jake, I want to hear your rating and review.
Man, I didn't even know we were doing ratings and reviews of this game, but I will say this, like, this game, Marvel Snap, is like absolutely melting my brain in a good and a bad way, I think. In a good way, because I'm having a lot of fun exploring it. In a bad way, because it's like consuming every moment of my life that I'm like not actively doing something else. It's just so damn easy and addictive to play this game right now, to the point where I'm like, I need to stop, and hopefully this episode is going to help me like get it sort of out of my system a little bit. I'm spreading the disease. I'm putting out into the world. Like, maybe this is like I don't know. Is that like The Ring, the movie The Ring situation? Basically,
No, we gotta go Marvel. It's like symbiote or something.
Okay, well, I don't know about that, but yeah. Anyway, I'm giving Marvel Snap, I don't know, a 9. It's like an incredible app. I think the game is fantastic.
So awesome. That was really helpful. I guess we're gonna truly recommend it in the back end of the show, and I think we'll do the same for me, because I think that there's some things about this game we really love, and some games that are maybe a little about this game that are really frustrating. But here's mine, Jake, and I think you're gonna empathize with mine. I know you're not a massive Marvel fan, but you know who Thanos is.
Yeah.
Okay, great. What if Thanos wasn't trying to snap half of all life in the universe out of existence, but was instead trying to snap half the free time of the world out of existence? In that case, with Marvel Snap, he'd be Marvel's most successful villain today. Oh wait, that's actually already the case, but he'd succeed all over again. Marvel Snap is an incredible game packed absolutely full of interesting decisions. The game's hooks, a clever snapping mechanism, a 12-card deck, and a brilliantly designed location system means that no two games of Marvel Snap ever played will be quite the same, and that's delightful. I expect to be playing Marvel Snap for months, if not years to come. 9.5 Infinity Stones out of 10.
Wow, that's pretty high. But
It's a really, really good game.
But it's not as high as who was supposed to be our third host on this week's episode, Paul Solomon. He had to back out last minute, unfortunately. Paul, you're very missed. But he did send me his slogan and review to share on air. So Paul, he's been on the show a bunch, designer of Honey Buzz, among other games. He says, here's his slogan. This is the greatest card game app ever. Better even than Star Realms 10 out of 10.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
Yeah.
So for background, for those of you who maybe don't know Paul or didn't listen to our Star Realms episode, Star Realms was Paul's favorite card game of all time. The digital app was his favorite digital app of all time. He had a podcast about it, probably sunk thousands of hours of his life into it. So I just want to contextualize that those words come with the weight of like 16 Hulks crashing into your ears, not just some guy on the street who played Star Realms 3 times.
Yeah. So if because we're missing Paul's voice as we have this discussion, just know that like any criticism we have for this game, there should be Paul as another voice telling us why we're dumb. So unfortunately, we're missing that.
I wish he could be here to refute the free to hit play model or to refute my criticisms, but we'll see. Maybe we'll get into some.
Yeah.
Jake will get into some refutation. Maybe I will. We'll get into it. But Jake, I want to talk about, normally we do this background thing, which works really well for board games where, within the board game community, there's been this concerted effort to be really transparent about who works on games. We say who the designers are, the publishers are really clear and known, who other members of the development team are really clear. And some of that information is out there for Marvel Snap, but I couldn't find it all published in one space. So I'm going to name a few names. I'm going to give a little bit of information on the company who published Marvel Snap. It's actually their first ever game, and talk about this one binding force that links them all. Okay, so this game is designed by a group of Hearthstone alums. A lot of the people who worked on this game worked on another digital card game, Hearthstone, which I'm sure most of this audience has heard of. It's one of the most successful digital card games of all time. So the team who made this game are a lot of people who worked on Hearthstone for a really long time, left Blizzard, the company who published Hearthstone, and started a company called Second Dinner. And this is their first game. This is the freshmen. We're released from our Hearthstone environment. We get to do what we want to do. And this is the effort. And I think just a round of applause in my book for Yang Wu, Ben Brode, and Kent Eric Hagman, who are 3 people who I could find who worked on this game. I think it's...
So who are these figures? I've heard of Ben Brode before. And in my mind, coming into this conversation, he was kind of like the guy behind Hearthstone and the guy behind this.
That's great. That's a lot of more information than I have. So I'm really glad that you know that. For Yang Wu, I'm just reading quickly that he was a Blizzard employee and a member of, quote, Team 5, who served as lead producer for Hearthstone until his departure. So a really central member in working on the Hearthstone team. And then Kent Eric Hagman, there was an interview with him. I don't have his title in front of me, but he talked about the experience of joining the design team. They'd already been working on the game for some time. He sort of stepped in and picked up what was, he thought, a really exciting game that he saw, and sort of continued with the pieces that were there, doing card design, I imagine, and that sort of thing.
So Ben Brode is a great Twitter follow. He talks a lot about game design. I think people might be interested in his feed. But one of the interesting things is, even though these are digital card games, he's talked about how they prototype everything in physical components. And I think you get the sense of that playing this game, maybe even more than Hearthstone, where it really feels like so much of Marvel Snap could be something you'd play on your table. And I think, there are some reasons why, not quite, it wouldn't quite be possible. But I think like 95% of this game, if published as a card game, a physical card game, would be like an immensely successful and popular board game product.
Definitely. There's a few, like Jake is alluding to, a few little tweaks you'd have to make, maybe some other little
It's just like
wrinkles
some
about,
cards, right? Mainly in locations.
but you can work around it.
Mhm.
There's little pieces going on. I also want to say you called out that people should follow Ben Brode. You can find him at BRODE. And he was the Hearthstone game director before coming over and becoming the chief development officer at Second Dinner, working on Marvel Snap, to provide that background.
Awesome.
Jake, before we get into the game itself, I think it's important for our listeners. There's this white elephant in the room of theme that's really important to this game. It's called Marvel Snap. It's a celebration of a lot of things Marvel. It pulls in tons of characters. I think it's important for listeners to have an understanding of where we're at in terms of our enjoyment or lack thereof of Marvel, just to add some context to the conversation. So maybe just really quickly, we can give people a background on sort of, do we watch the movies? Do we read comics, the Marvel comics growing up? What about games? And maybe, do you consider yourself a fan of Marvel?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. I subscribe to Disney Plus, so I've tried to watch some of the Marvel TV shows on there. I thought that the Loki one was pretty good. I thought that WandaVision was like pretty good. Maybe like 6 to 7 out of 10 on each of those. Most of the movies I find pretty awful. I mean, awful might be harsh, but like very forgettable and formulaic. So I wouldn't call myself like a big fan. I think they hit like a solid hot streak for a several movie series. Like, I really enjoyed Black Panther and Thor Ragnarok, and I think maybe that was right around when like they were kind of finishing up the Thanos arc with the Avengers stuff. And I was like, okay, oh wow, like there's something really interesting happening with these like Marvel movies. Like, they've figured something out. And then and now I feel like we're right back to like utterly forgettable stuff again. So, it interests me enough that like a lot of times if there's like a big cultural event, like everybody's seeing these movies, everybody's talking about the Loki TV show, I'll definitely check it out. It's not like I won't touch anything Marvel, but really, if anything, it's probably a negative to me at this point, where it's just like I feel like a little exhausted by it, the content that we're typically consuming in movies and TV.
So Marvel fan is not on your business card.
No, yeah.
Yeah, no. I think I'm coming into this as more of a fan of Marvel than you are. I've watched almost every single movie, I think. I never saw the Hulk with pre John Ruffalo Hulk. So they made a movie. I never saw that
Ruffalo?
one, but I've seen Mark Ruffalo. Thank you. Who did I say?
John Ruffalo.
Yeah, let's go, Jake. Thank you for saving me. I enjoy the movies a lot. I don't think they're amazing films from that perspective, but I think as blockbusters, they're really entertaining. I'm really intrigued by the mythos and the sort of modern day comparison to like a pantheon of gods. I think that's like interesting culturally, and it's certainly an important cultural touchstone. I didn't grow up playing the comics, and I would play Marvel games. Like, I thought the arcade game, the 5-person arcade game growing up, was really cool. But typically I had friends who liked Marvel more than I did and kind of picked up. I picked up on Marvel stuff from them, enjoyed it, could take it or leave it. So coming into Marvel Snap, the theme, I'm happy to be learning more, some new characters, but I'm not here for the Marvel. I'm here for the game because the game's good. Yeah.
I would agree with that. And I think even like as a kid, I was more of a DC guy.
Batman.
Well, anyway, I won't get into Batman take. Let's talk about Marvel Snap instead.
Let's do it.
All right. So are we doing like our typical board gaming deep dive, but we're applying it to Marvel Snap?
Typical board gaming deep dive Marvel stuff. I even wrote a rules overview. Everything.
Oh, you did? I have to edit a rules overview for this? Oh my God. That's great.
It was perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right.
I haven't recorded it yet.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case,
Marvel Snap is a digital head-to-head card game for 2 players. The game's objective is simple: have the most power at 2 of the 3 locations when the game ends. Shared between the 2 players are 3 locations, each with a special effect. These locations are revealed turn 1, turn 2, and turn 3, and they can fundamentally change the rules of the game. Each player has a constructed 12-card deck made up of cards that have an energy cost, a power value, and potentially a special ability. Marvel Snap is played over just 6 rounds, and players have energy to spend on their turns equal to the round that it is. So in the first turn, players have 1 energy, meaning they can only play 1-cost cards. On round 2, they have 2 energy, meaning they could play a 2-cost card, or they could play 2 1-cost cards, and so on for rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6. The locations used each game are pulled from a pool of 80 or more locations, meaning that no 2 games ever feel alike. At the start of each turn, players draw a card, and this is the core gameplay loop. Then they assign cards simultaneously and blindly to the 3 locations. Once each player has done that, those cards are revealed, and players activate any effects on them. A final important rule is that no more than 4 cards can be assigned to any one location by each player. So players have to be careful and thoughtful about how they sequence the cards they play to secure a location without revealing too much information about their plans too soon. After 6 rounds, the player with the most power at 2 of the game's 3 locations wins. But Marvel Snap has one more twist: the snap mechanism. At any point in the game, if a player has not yet snapped, they can snap, doubling the stakes of the match, starting on the subsequent turn. Moving into the final round of the game, the stakes double as well. But players can opt to retreat from matches, conceding the game for a smaller penalty if they know they're doomed, rather than forging ahead and incurring a large penalty following a snap by their opponent. The snap mechanism adds an interesting tactical and strategic decision around the game's meta-game playing experience as players try to rank up and unlock more cards from the game's card pool.
Thank you, Brendan. What an incredible rules overview. Let's get into our deep dive discussion of Marvel Snap.
Okay, top of the notes. What do we always do at this point in the show? We characterize the decision space, and that's what we're going to be doing today. I think we won't dwell on this for too long, but we like to talk about things like clarity. How clear are the decisions on a turn-to-turn basis about what you're doing and what your opponent might be doing? We like to talk about size and also the type of decision space, right? Does the decision space grow? Does it shrink? Is it dynamic? Is it static? That sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the key elements of this game is the fact that you're gaining, just like in Hearthstone, if you're familiar with that, and different from Magic the Gathering as for like your mana, where you maybe are getting more or not. In this, you're consistently getting 1 more energy every turn. So on turn 1, you get 1 energy to spend. Turn 2, you have 2 energy to spend. You could maybe play 1 card that costs 2 energy, or 2 cards that cost 1 energy each. So on and so forth till you get 6 energy on the final turn. So just from a pure resource spending angle, I think you can say that this game has a waxing element. You're definitely growing in power, right? And growing in your ability to affect the board in most cases by the final turn of the game compared to your first couple of turns.
I agree, but I'm gonna from my position, I think this is one of the most dynamic games we've covered on the show. If only because so much of this game and the way the locations affect the decisions that you're going to make, and the way the locations are revealed throughout the game, and the way your opponent's cards are informing your decisions, I think that the shape of a given decision space of a game of Marvel Snap, every single game has the potential to look so different that for me, it's hard to say this is this type of game. This is a waxing game because we're getting more energy. Just because some games you might get more energy, some games you might be in a position where you don't have as much energy, or there might be fewer locations. There might be There's never more locations, but things about the locations will change.
I think that's totally fair. I think you could characterize it either way. Definitely, the overall framework of the game is that increasing power. But sometimes the location will reveal on turn 1 that says you have +5 energy, and then that's going to obviously then you'll be going down in power the next turn as you go back to 2. So I think dynamic is fair. It's dynamic decisions overlaid on top a structure that at its baseline is waxing.
And then the locations are waning, because there's a limit of 4 cards at every location. So as you add more cards, your potential to add cards in the future is decreasing.
I think that's an interesting
Yeah.
one too. Like the waning element of the locations is uh, both objective, as you pointed out. Right, once you've played 4 cards into there, that option is no longer available to you unless you
Yep.
can somehow move something out using an ability before placing something else. But it's also maybe even more impactfully on the decisions you're making on the game. It has like a subjective element of waning where like if your opponent has 35 power to your 0 at a location, right? You're
Yeah.
not going to play the structure of the game is just to win 2 out of 3. So, at a certain point you say, okay, I can't contest that. So that is, even though I could technically put something in there, like my uh like subjective decision space of viable moves do not include that one space any longer.
And that's because if you haven't played Marvel Snap, so there's 6 turns and cards range in cost from 1 to 6. So the ones have a range of power from 1 on the low downside with potential for strong effects to usually around 3 or 4 is where you'll max out on a 1 cost card. And then the most expensive cards, like a baseline for a 6 drop card that's really strong, is like the Hulk. He adds 12 power to his location. There's other cards and effects that can go higher, and there's some 6 cost cards that are lower but have a bigger impact on other cards you have out. But if like Jake was saying, if a location's at 30 and you don't have any cards there, you're going to be hard pressed to mount a counteroffensive because you just don't have the resources. This is a very combo focused card game, and we don't talk about games often, Jake, where the players are using different components. Right? This is a deck construction game. You have a collection, I have a collection. We're building a 12-card deck. We're bringing them. So I think that adds a degree of fuzziness to the decision space that isn't present in a lot of the games that we play and isn't present in sort of a cousin game like Air, Land, and Sea, which has really similar decisions. It's a small box card game, but that's where you have this really bound, known deck. In Marvel Snap, there's a lot of unknown about what my opponent's deck has, and part of the game is trying to figure out what type of strategy they're playing into, or maybe preventing my opponent from figuring that out.
Yeah, I think perhaps the most interesting element of the game is trying to understand the clarity of the decision space because it's just functioning on so many different axes that will be familiar, I think, to people who have played competitive card games before, like Magic the Gathering. And then also in an entirely new way with this snap mechanism, which I imagine you've talked about in the rules overview. So, like to your point, it is at the beginning of the game, it's very unclear. You know what cards you have. You don't know any of the cards in your opponent's deck, except for that they are exist within the same pool of, however many cards you have access to at any given time. And the game does a really good job, seemingly. I don't know if you've had this experience where it feels like the matchmaking does a good job of pairing people up with people who have similar collection sizes. You may not have the exact same set of cards, but you're not going to have only 30 cards unlocked and play against somebody who has all cards you've never seen before. Maybe your opponents will have like 1 or 2 new to you cards, but pretty often you'll have a sense that their collection mirrors your own. You just don't know which of those that they've brought into it. So it starts out very fuzzy, but as you play more, just like in a game of Magic the Gathering, right, where you would start out not knowing what anybody's cards are that you're playing against, like as soon as they start playing cards, you can start to have clearer and clearer ideas of what the remaining cards in their deck might be, because they're a sort of and even without like knowing what Marvel Snap decks are competitive and like doing research on net decking and all that stuff, which I haven't done at all. I've actually like fiercely avoided doing that just because I think that would suck a lot of the joy out of the game for me. There's still just like very clear archetypes. Like a lot of the decks provide synergy around moving cards around. So if you see a couple of cards early on that enable movement from lane to lane, then you can start predicting like, oh, I bet they have this like 6 cost payoff card in the deck that moves everything. So it's just by playing the game, without even really trying to, you'll start being able to make inferences about what other cards they might have that might come out that you could avoid really quickly. So in that sense, the game is becoming more and more clear as you play. And I think that like theme of clarifying elements actually is happening in like many different ways at the same time, because at the beginning all the locations are unrevealed, so you don't know what could come out, how that could shape it. But by the third turn, you do have all that information. Again, clarifying the decision space. Um, and then finally, like the kind of last part of the access of clarifying decision space would be around who's going to win the game.
Mhm.
In turn one, nobody has anything on the board. Very difficult to say. You might have some sense based on like, okay, great, I drew all three of my combo pieces in my opening hand. I like my chances of winning this game. Or like all the cards I got in my first hand are high cost cards, so maybe I'm a little bit behind the eight ball of just developing my board like on time. Instead, where ideally you want to play a one drop, a two drop, a three drop, right? Use all your energy efficiently every turn. But by the time you get to the fourth and fifth round, it's starting to become a lot more clear about who's got the advantage, in the different lanes and who's more likely to win. And that is normally sort of a downside in a game, right? Like, okay, this person's already going to win the game. My opponent seems very likely to win the game. So, and now we're just like going through the motion. But this has the really great retreat and snap mechanism where at any point in the game, either player can either choose to double down their odds that they think they're going to win, or choose to back off and retreat. And I think that the game does such a good job of making this element a really fun. Sorry, I got dogs fighting in here. A really fun and skill testing element. Because like the quicker you can diagnose that you're going to win and snap, the more likely your opponent might continue to play the game instead of retreating right away, giving you more benefit from that.
And just to make sure it's really clear, I want to mention what the benefit of snapping is for people, because I did mention it in the rules overview. But the benefit of it is when you snap, you double down, you raise the stakes of the match. And what you're getting if you win is ranked points. So your rank is increasing. So it provides this meta game. And I don't mean meta game like how people typically use the word to talk about what's good in a game environment. I'm using it more how Richard Garfield used it to talk about the metagame of playing Magic originally, of this idea of we're playing the game, and at the same time as playing this one game of this game, I'm making decisions that are impacting my playing of this game overall. I have this dual experience of my progress as a player of Marvel Snap and my progress towards winning this game individually. And I think that that's a really powerful and fun mechanism, especially in such a quick game where, oh, I'll just cut my losses and play again. And in such a variable game. You were talking about, Jake, how the longer the game goes on, the more clear it becomes. And that can be true. You could start with a really bad hand, though. And because locations are revealed on the first three turns of the game, you might start with a poor hand and luck into a really strong location for your position, actually, and end up in a strong spot where you can take a okay hand and turn it into a winning game. And I think that that's part of that loop that's so fun, where it's really fuzzy. It seems like it's really bad, but this luck swing brings you right back into it. And then for me, Jake, what's so cool is the first few turns, there's lots of uncertainty. One, where's my opponent going to go? What outcome am I going to get based on the cards that I play? There's lots of cards that give you a benefit if you play them at the same location as another player. So I'm trying to guess where my opponent might be putting cards if I'm playing that type of card. So even the impact of cards I'm playing is uncertain until cards are revealed. And then by the end of the game, we've switched to something that feels turn 6, round 6 feels a lot like solving a puzzle. Okay, this is the board state. I have knowledge about what is in my hand. I have knowledge about what I think might be in my opponent's hand. What are the outs that I could lose to? Are they likely to have those? Okay. And then are there ways that I can play around this, right? You have to win 2 of the 3 locations, not all 3. So am I playing mind games about it looks like I'm going to win here, but I'm actually going to try to win the other 2 and have those be the 2 winning ones? You can never fully solve. Sometimes you can fully solve the puzzle, and that's when you retreat. But I find it's a really delicious puzzle that you're trying to solve. And there's enough uncertainty when it's close that it feels tense and exciting down to the last reveal.
To me, like what this game is doing with uncertainty and clarity is the most interesting thing about it.
Yep.
And I think it really asks players to, maybe this would be a good way to think about like if you should try this game or not, would be like, does that meta game of deciding when to snap, when to retreat sound interesting to you? Would you like to play a game of Magic the Gathering if it had that same mechanism more than just like a regular game of Magic the Gathering? Um, because like the game itself without that is very random, right? And like there's a lot of times where you can just lose out of no fault of your own. It's not the
Mhm.
kind of game where the best player is going to win at all. Maybe the best player wins a very slight majority, right? Or maybe more than very slight, but it's definitely not. It's like closer to Magic than like chess, right? Where it's like maybe you can get your win percentage against equally skilled opponents up to like 55, 56%. But I can't imagine there's anyone winning against, equivalent opponents like upwards of like 80, 90% of the time. There's just too
Mm.
much random variables, which, and the point I'm trying to make is that like, I think that the real skill ceiling in this game is around like knowing when to snap, knowing when
Yeah,
to retreat. And I think like the amount you can get better at that, which is ultimately what's going to enable you to advance up rank play or not advance up rank play. Because like if you're losing games where you snap because you thought you were going to win, it's devastating. Like you
devastating.
fall
Yeah.
fast.
The
Uh,
range is between one, you could win one, or you could win or lose eight. So it's a
right.
huge swing of ranked potential points. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Versus like your opponent's making a mistake snapping and you're actually able to snap like after them and win, then you're the one punishing them. I think that's where a lot of like the real skill in this game is manifesting.
I think that certainly knowing the card pool, I think that there's. I come from the background you do as well too, somewhat of fighting games and the mind games around simultaneous choice games. I think that there's certainly skill there. You don't have as much of the execution side of it, but I think that there is some skill in reading your opponent and the decisions that they've made so far. I don't know that I'm. I think you're right that we're closer here of skill ceiling to another card game than we are to chess. But I think also you were sort of giving like reasons why you might enjoy this game. So, or why you might want to try it. One of the other reasons I want to just highlight when we're on that point of the conversation is a lot of card games that you might play are one of the joys of them is that they offer variability because of cards being the combination of cards coming together. Marvel Snap is really interesting, right? Because it's a 12 card deck. That's a really small deck. So you see the same cards really often. So the designers of this game did something brilliant because one of the benefits of a card game is that you normally get variability that's reduced with a 12 card deck. We're going to have more consistent play. And in fact, there's cards where, because this is a digital game, if you include it in your deck, you'll always draw this card on turn 1, or you'll always draw this card on turn 6, or you'll always draw this card on turn 2. They just push that idea of consistency really far. So, it's a card game with high consistency. Where's the variability going to come from? It's coming from the locations. And those locations change the decisions so much that every game really does feel different. So it's a card game where the variability doesn't as much come from the cards, some, but that really come from from the locations. So oftentimes when you're playing another card game, you'll get variability in your game plan from this matchup. How do I approach playing against my opponent? What cards they have? You have that here, but you're always looking at your own deck through the lens of the locations. And that's a really unique card game experience to some extent that I find to be the majority of the fun is every game says, okay, you have your tool, you have your 12 cards, but how are you going to solve this specific version of the puzzle? And it
Yeah.
works so well.
Totally. I agree. Yeah. And I think like an important distinction there is like the fun of the game. I agree with you is in like the chaotic randomness that can occur and like you know, all the time, like playing this game, like I just have to like take a screenshot and like immediately like share like this like absurd thing that happens. Or because it's like a digital game, like new content can just be like infused in at any time.
Mm-hmm.
So you might just like all of a sudden like you're playing, you see this location that you've never seen before, and like just something insane is happening. So mild spoiler if you're want to experience this firsthand like I did. But Brent, have you seen the ego location yet?
You alluded to this, and I'm pretty sure is this the one that just plays your turn? It just plays the game for
It just
you.
starts playing. It says the ego is now playing your deck. So at that
Yeah.
point, all card playing decisions are out of your hand and your opponent's hand. So all that's left in the game is, do I
Snapping.
retreat or do I
Yep.
snap? And it's
Yeah.
still fun and interesting, which is like,
Yep.
that was, I think, one of the things that kind of like, it's like, this is so funny. Like, I can't believe this is just happening. Like, I'm like playing this game and I'm not even playing it. But that also clued me into it. It's like, okay, wait, I think the really interesting thing that's happening here is like the retreat and the snap mechanism.
I love that location, Jake, because when I first saw it, I was like, oh, I'm playing an auto battler now. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know, like that one change. And things like that that's a good example of what we were talking about, where yes, this could be implemented in tabletop, but there's design decisions that take advantage of digital that do fresh things that feel really fun. Like here, the AI is just going to play out your turn and you get to make the snapping decisions.
Yeah. It's also an example of just like the type of like bad luck or good luck or whatever. Like, you know, in one time that happened and like me and my opponent both snapped right away. And like
Yeah, you gotta.
the ego guy made great decisions with my cards and just the worst with the opponent. He's just like spamming like the I'm dead emote over and over. And it was just hilarious. So they got very unlucky there. Whereas, you know, there's other locations that pop up. It's like, okay, actually, like, whoever has lower power wins this location. And if that's the third one to reveal and you've already played cards there and it pops up, you're like, okay, I guess I just lose this game. Like, that's so unlucky. And so I retreat. And that, you know, that kind of stuff happens all the time in this game.
I do find though, Jake, that, and we've talked about this game enough that I know that I think you will agree. What you're saying is yes, absolutely true, but you can also build your deck in most cases to give yourself tools to deal with the hyper variable cards, right? Like there's always the Scarlet Witch exists, which is this card that randomly changes the location to a new one. So you can you can increase your agency over some of the variants in this game. Or there's locations that will say you can't play cards here, meaning you can only move cards in. In those, there's cards that you can use to move, or you can use Mr. Fantastic to add 3 value to each lane. There's usually little ways around, oh, this randomness seems really bad, but you have enough to. One thing when I look at the design is every little element, whether it's a location or a card, it feels like every piece has its counter. And they're all kind of there, and you just have to find the piece to solve the puzzle.
Yeah.
You might not have them in your deck, though.
Right. You might not have them in your deck, or you might have the wrong ones in your deck. Like, I think what the game does is it like gives you tools to answer the thing that frustrates you. If you get there's no mulliganing in this deck, or in this game, right? You're stuck with your starting set of cards. So if you get, you know, all of your most expensive cards in your first hand, there's nothing really you can do. Maybe you get lucky and draw into everything you need, but you're behind the 8 ball for sure. Versus somebody that's being able to make turn 1, turn 2, turn 3 plays. And Ben Brody on his Twitter feed had a really interesting thread about the decision not to have mulligans, and they didn't want mulligans in the game because with a 12 card deck, like your decks are already incredibly consistent. Like if you have a 2 card combo, you're finding that a high percentage of the time, just because you're seeing, you know, like what, like
you've seen a quarter of your deck at the start of turn 1.
Yeah, quarter of your deck at turn 1, and then you're drawing 6 more cards. You're getting 9 of your 12 cards.
Yep.
Every game. So they don't want to have a mulligan in it. So what they did to address the feedback that was coming up in playtesting over and over again, it was like, I really wish we could mulligan, was they added the card Quicksilver to the starting deck. And what Quicksilver does is it's one of the cards that has the ability where you always draw it on your first turn. And, you know, that one change totally eliminated the complaints about being able to mulligan. So much so that, you know, Ben Brody said on Twitter that like at the launch of the game, he didn't receive any complaints about mulliganing. And what that does is like it fundamentally gives players the agency to choose what annoys them, right? Like you can take that out of your deck, but then you have the agency of foregoing that automatic 1-turn play.
Exactly. And even if you don't play Quicksilver, I don't play that card, but you know that you could have, and psychologically that having access to tools is oftentimes like the opportunity to use something is enough. I don't always have to use it, right? Like the fact that I could have used it can make me feel better about my experience. And to play off your sort of thread here of high agency to deal with what's frustrating you about the game, the central mechanic, the snapping mechanic, is exactly that.
Yeah.
Right? I can retreat if I think I'm going to lose. If I don't want to deal with randomness, I will leave and I won't play. But I also can snap and I can gamble for points, and it's really fun, and the stakes can get really high. So you have that agency, and it's really cool.
Yeah, and I think too, like the benefits, like 1 cube to 8 cubes for like that's like the currency to rank up, basically.
Yeah.
You get so one you mentioned like 1 cube is the least you can lose, and 8 is
Yep.
the most, and it feels like so well balanced even there, where it's like 8 feels so significant and 1 feels like nothing.
Yeah.
Like retreating and losing 1 cube, like you just really don't feel like punished about that almost at all. Which makes it so much easier. Like there's a card or a location that can pop up where just randomly out of all the pool of cards gives each player one. And I got something that had 1 power, and my opponent got a card that had 20 power on turn 1 of the game. It's like, okay, I retreat. And it was
Yep.
and
And you just laugh. It's
and
fun.
yeah, and
It's
I like
funny.
share the picture with you and in our
Yep.
Discord, and it's like, you know what, that was so worth the 1 cube for a laugh.
I guess we should have made it 40 minutes into the episode, Jake, without mentioning that this game plays out in 5 minutes. You can play a whole game in
Yeah,
5 minutes, maybe even less.
I feel like 5 is
So that's
almost max, and
that's the time scale we're
that's
talking.
another thing about, and maybe the biggest thing about this game that is different digital than in
Yeah, it
person.
goes real quick.
It goes quick. Everything goes faster because you're not dealing with cards, and it has like a working timer.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, I guess you could do some kind of like sand timer, but those don't really work that well in practice in board
Yeah.
games, I've found. So having the like little ticking clock, it works great, and it also heightens the uncertainty where you get to like this complex situation on the final turn. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times I'm puzzling it out the whole time, and I
Yep.
maybe just run out of time before I can figure it out.
Yeah.
My bandwidth, or whatever, just like isn't quite high enough. And then even if I like no, I'm like, they definitely are playing this card. Like, how can I beat it? And I get to the end and I don't beat it, and I look at it for 30 more seconds, and I'm like, okay, I could have done it
I could have
this
won this
way.
way.
Like, has that
Yep.
happened to you?
All the
It
time.
happens to me
And I
so
also
much.
Yeah, and I also, which to me is why my gut instinct is, oh, this game has a higher skill ceiling than it feels like it might, given the randomness, just because there's so often where I lose games that I could have won had I made a different decision, which is really rewarding as a player. Also, one thing I love, Jake, about the snapping mechanism, so the way it really works, right, is if I snap, I double it. So I turn it from 1 to 2, or if you snap, you double it 1 to 2. If either player snaps, either player can snap, doubling the current stakes. But the game also forces a snap going into the final turn. So if you want to see how things play out, there's going to be at
You
least
have
one
to
snap.
pay. Yeah.
You have to pay. And I think that that's a really, it's really strong just from a gameplay experience to just raise the stakes a little bit to see the final info and the payout.
Yeah.
I think that that's a brilliant design decision. And it's also really fun, Jake, when you'll get to turn the start of turn 6 and the game has snapped. Neither of you have snapped. You look at your hand, you look at your position, and you both snap.
Yeah.
So you go from what was last turn, the stakes were 1. So if you retreated on turn 5, you would have lost 1. And now this turn, the stakes are 8, and you snap, so you're in it.
Yeah.
Like, it's so great.
And that's
it's really fun.
where the skill comes out, if you're really trying to play to like rank up and do the best you can in the game. It's like a lot of times it's like, yeah, I'll pay, to see how it plays out. I'm probably going to lose, but it's just 2 cubes. And then like, as soon as it flips over to that turn, your opponent snaps and you're like, okay, well now I just like retreat, I guess, because it's not worth like 4 to me. And then I just wasted 1 for no reason,
Totally.
and I think there's also some kind of like element too of like bluffing, right? There's a real bluffing element where if I snap real early, maybe your opponent backs off. Whereas like just like in poker, right? Sometimes it's better just to check. Just wait if I have like the nuts draw, get to that like final round snap and then, gamble.
Yep.
Or sometimes it's like, I think I'm a little bit ahead here, so I'm going to snap early and see if they'll just back off.
There's also cards designed to allow you to have these early game snap moments where you'll get a small but meaningful advantage, right? So there's 2 cost cards, 2 drops, like Star-Lord. Star-Lord says if you play this at the location where your opponent plays a card, instead of being a 2-power card, he becomes a 5-power card. That's a pretty meaningful jump in terms of my advantage. If Jake, let's say you just play a 3-value 2 cost card, I'm ahead meaningfully in that position, which gives me an excuse to not wait to snap. Maybe I snap now because maybe you feel psychologically deterred by that fact, or maybe on turn 1 I got you with Mantis, similar ability, or Rocket. Turn 2 I get you with Star-Lord. I'm snapping just to see what you do, right? Like maybe you run, and if so, great.
Yeah.
If not, yeah, it's fun. Also, you can bluff lanes too, right? Like maybe I'll add 1 card here, like I'll put Hawkeye in the left lane. And Hawkeye says if you play a card next turn, you get a big bonus, a nice little bonus for playing a card in this lane. But I'm playing it there to tell Jake that I'm going there, but I'm actually going to the right lane. So again, we're equipped with the tools to play in these different ways. If you want to play that way, you can play this more bluffing style game using the Guardians and some of these cards that let you gesture. And I love that about this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun, like when the strategy of where you want to play, like what 2 lanes am I trying to win, rubs up against, like I'm just trying to like put out, like ultimately, with like the Star-Lord hitting, or Rocket does the same thing as 1 cost can get a 2 cost buff. It's like ultimately the game is about making more power than your opponent.
Yeah, than your opponent.
If you're creating like the most power, you're probably doing good, but it doesn't mean you're definitely going to win if like my 50 power is spread out equally across 3 lanes and my opponent's 30 power is just in 2 lanes.
And that's the core tension.
Right.
And flexibility. We all know flexibility is so strong in games, right? So you want to go wide. You want to keep your options open. Maybe you played all 3 lanes, but if you do that, maybe you're spreading yourself too thin and your opponent can just jump in and dial down on 2 really hard. So there's this cat and mouse game of where are we battling? Who's winning where, which lane? Because over the course of the game, if you follow the curve perfectly, you play a 1-cost card turn 1, a 2-cost card turn 2, a 3-cost card turn 3, and so on. You will have played 6 cards. But there are 12 spots for cards to go. So there's lots of wiggle room between these 2 poles of I'm going to fill up the whole board with 12 cards. There's cards that let you play multiple effects. There's 12 cards in your deck. So maybe you're drawing, you're playing 2 cards a turn versus playing 1. And I think that tension is really fun too. Of like, am I using a precision tool or am I swinging?
Yeah. Yeah, and the question of like how many, like in the deck construction is rich too, right? Where you're like, do I want to include threats or answers? And I feel like it's just something I've like struggled so much with in the game. I mean, maybe we'll talk a little bit about deck building here. I'm interested to hear like some of the decks that you're using, what works for you, but like the other thing that's like so great about this like ecosystem of the app is like back in my formative years playing Magic the Gathering, like if I wanted to like go to a tournament, like predict like a meta game, like maybe I was lucky enough to have like a group of like 4 or 5 people and we could like put together like some semblance of like the competitive decks and like test decks against them. But then like if I wanted to like tweak my deck, it was just like in theory, because it's not like we're able to like reconvene and like do that all the time. But here, like, and I know like, Magic Arena works the same way, right? You can instantly get lots of games, you can instantly get in a tournament. But here, like, because of how fast games are, like the iterative process of like deck construction, of just tweaking my deck a little bit, like how's that work? Okay, change it a little bit more this other way. How's that work? And it feels like, the and we haven't even talked about how like sometimes the app will like give you a featured location that's likely to appear more, and like you can build your deck around that specifically. But like just sort of like the iterative process is so satisfying, where it feels like you're like metagaming, right? Trying to answer the meta that is like this ecosystem that is shifting in real time with you.
One thing that I love about the deck construction too, Jake, is because, we've talked about how a lot of card games give you variability, right? You have 4 copies of a bunch of cards, It's a 60 card deck, so you have lots of variability in how that plays out, and you're trying to solve the puzzle of your draw. Snap does not work that way. You know roughly, you can be pretty sure if you build a curve, you're going to mostly curve out. Not always, but usually. So I love the deck construction in this game because I'm imagining, okay, out of my turn 4 scenarios, what are the things that I could be doing and what options do I want available to me realistically, right? Like I can puzzle that out. There's only 6 turns. I can think this deck, when I'm falling behind, is actually usually turn 3. How do I make a stronger turn 3? Do I need to be combining more 1s and 2 drops to be contesting 2 lanes? Do I just need stronger 3 drops that I can use to more reliably contest 1 lane? That little bite and those questions are really rewarding. And we've talked about how sometimes the most fun games are the ones that are just beyond the cognitive horizon.
Yeah.
And Snap and its deck construction is right there. Like it's so much of, I can imagine the scenarios, and every game feels different because of the locations. We've covered that, but I love the puzzle solving of deck building in this game. It's really rewarding and fun.
And it's amazing, like as the total collection of cards available to me right now it's not that vast. How many?
Yep. So there's right now,
but like I mean, just like me personally, like where I'm at, I feel like I have like 100-ish cards.
Interesting. I feel like I have roughly 80.
Okay.
For listeners, you should know that there's 3 card pools. So when you first start playing, you'll just unlock cards from the first pool, then the second, then the third. So I'm still in that first pool. But I still feel like I have varied choices.
So for people who have played Marvel Snap might be curious, right now I'm at collection level 294. I haven't paid for the seasonal pass. I'm purely free to play mode, and I'm level 51, which is platinum rank.
And I don't have my phone right on me, but I'm like collection level mid, like 145, 148 or something. And I'm at rank level 48.
Okay, cool. So I mean, we're pretty close there.
Yep.
And I agree. Like I feel like the game is so consistent that like it makes me want to like. This is why I think this is like good for board gamers too. It's like it makes me want to like physically prototype my deck so that I can like play it out and like, okay, like how much power can I make? Like if I have all these cards, like doing the 6 turn thing. Yep. But then there's cards like the America Chavez, who this is like a 6 cost card that you always draw in the last turn of the game, which does like theoretically incredibly powerful thing of like smoothing out your draws like that much more, but your draws are already pretty smooth without it. So like, and sometimes like there's a card I need going that last round that I know I won't get if that's in my deck. So like, how much is that worth to me? And like, there's just so many cards like that where it's like there's like a 2-drop card that shuffles 1 rock, which is like a meaningless card, into your opponent's deck, or it costs 1, gives you 2 power, and like that feels like I think it's good, but I play it and I never see the rock, so I don't know if my opponents are drawing it or not. Like, what's that worth to me in like a really aggressive strategy deck? So it's really fun to sort of like do the theory crafting, but I agree it's like difficult to like really get there. And I know you probably can just go online right now and look like what are the best performing decks at the top rank and try and like mimic that as much as possible. But like, what fun is that?
Okay, so Jake, to close out the show, I think we should each talk about like one deck, a few cards that we were enjoying, and maybe a location that we like, and then we can talk about the free-to-play model and do we recommend Marvel Snap?
Okay,
that's the close of the show.
Sounds awesome. Do you want to go first?
And if you named your deck, I want to hear it.
Okay.
What's that?
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
I'll go. What do you want to do?
Okay,
I don't care.
I'll give a deck, and you give a deck. Then I'll give a deck, then you give a deck.
Okay.
And we'll be really quick.
Okay.
All right. So the deck that I've been playing the most lately, I'll say the highest I've ever got is rank 55, and then I was trying out a new strategy and fell back to like 47, and I've been fighting my way up with this deck, which I called "Is This Aggro?" Because I've always liked playing aggressive strategies in games, and I don't even know what that means in Marvel Snap, like honestly.
Yeah.
So basically, this is a deck that came about because I realized like I had too many cards in my deck that were answers to questions, right? Like there's a card like called the Enchantress that like cancels ongoing abilities unrevealed. So that's really good against this like devil dinosaur card that a lot of people are using. I had, cards like Scarlet Witch, which you talked about, that like answers like problematic locations that like may pop up. But like ultimately, I felt like I was just losing so many games by like 1 or 2 power, which I feel like every game is decided by like 1 or 2 power somehow in this. And I thought like, okay, what would happen if I just got rid of all of the cards that are answers to things and just replace them with threats? And like, I'll let my opponent like fiddle around with their dinky combos and answer decks. And I'm just going to be putting out as much power as I can on a consistent basis. So this has 3 1-drops that can all power up, a 3 2-drops, 2 of which are Medusa and Lizard, which are really powerful, like on their own. 3 3-drops, a 4-drop, a 5-drop, and a 6-drop, and it's just basically everything has as much power as I possibly could find at that slot.
And you mean literally power?
Like, yeah. So I mean, sometimes
More
like
or
you have
less.
to facilitate, and I don't want to like get into the nuance of each card. Like,
what are your 6-drops?
My 6-drop is Spectrum, and that's the one sort of facilitator. So that powers up all ongoing power cards, of which I have 4 in the deck. Ant-Man, the 1-drop, who gets extra power if he's at a full location. Lizard, which surprisingly is ongoing power that's like negative, but it can still get powered up and catch people. And then Mr. Fantastic and the Punisher at 3 drops. Those are also ongoing. Nice. So, I mean, it's basically just like as aggressive as I can be. And yeah, I think it's been working in this sort of meta that seems dominated right now by combo decks and answers to those. And I'm just trying to like get in underneath and like, and it seems like it's working.
The combo deck Jake is referring to being mostly Dinosaur Devil Moon Girl is the really popular combo deck. And then there's some other ones, but like you see that a lot right now, just for maybe a little time capsule.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I lose to that deck, but I beat the control deck. So it's like almost like the reverse of like a normal thing where it's like aggro beats combo and combo beats control. Where it's like,
that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. My first deck that I want to talk about, I've called Heimdall Schmoves. So Heimdall's a 6-cost card that moves all of your other cards 1 location to the left. So I find movement in games like this. I really like the cards that let you move in air, land, and sea, which is sort of the spiritual companion game in a way, like a cousin design. So I liked the constraint around building around Heimdall. I unlocked him, and then I unlocked this guy called Multiple Man. Multiple Man says whenever you move him, create a copy at the location he moved from. Great, we have a core combo. Then there's some other fun pieces. Here's some tips if you're interested in the move deck. If you put Hulkbuster, this card that can combine with the card at a location and add its strength to the card you copied with, if you make a copy of the card with Hulkbuster, it keeps its strength. So I like to add Hulkbuster onto Multiple Man. Oh, great. Now he's a stronger card. I'll make a copy of a stronger. And then there's cards that lean into that a little bit, like Ironheart that can buff cards randomly. So I'm trying to build big copies, and my whole goal is to break people's ankles, right? Like gesture that I'm going hard on this right location, scooch to the left and close out the left 2. So I really like that deck. Heimdall Schmoves uses some other pieces that I think if you've played a little bit, you'd have a sense for what the pieces are, but that deck's a lot of fun.
All right. So my last deck is a deck that I don't really recommend, but I feel like it's almost there. I've been working on it. It was actually when I like tanked my rating playing so much, trying to get to work. And I know that Joe in our Discord's also been experimenting with this deck, and it's a Jubilee deck. So it's based around this card called Jubilee, which when you play it, you just you play on reveal, play a card from your deck at this location. So the idea, like I was like, how do you make Jubilee as strong as possible? So the idea of this deck is you use all the cards that you only draw at a specific turn. So you've got Quicksilver, which you always draw in turn 1, Domino, which you always draw in turn 2, and then America Chavez, who you always draw in turn 6. Jubilee costs 4 and has 1 power.
4. Okay.
And then I'm running, in addition to America Chavez, 3 other 6-powered cards, which you would never normally do because you could only play 1 in a deck.
Yep.
3 5-power cards. It's got like a 1 3 cost, and then the 1 4-drop, which is Moon Girl, because it just has like the Moon Girl Devil Sword combo. If it hits, it hits. Yep. Why not? It gives you like a second avenue to win. But yeah, that's basically the game plan. You want to draw Jubilee. Also, you can Moon Girl to double Jubilee, You also have Odin in here, which can activate Jubilee again, which is probably overkill on that location.
It's hilarious.
But yeah, it's a very, very silly and fun, like off the wall strategy that it's like had to try. And it's like the
Yeah,
type of strategy that's really facilitated by an app driven game.
definitely.
So yeah.
So my next deck is also kind of a Johnny deck. It's not a deck that I see a lot of people try to play. And this deck I've named Ongoing X. So there's a card in the game called Professor X. He costs 5 to play. So you're playing him turn 5 typically. Or if you get lucky, you could play him earlier. That's very strong because what Professor X does, he's a 3 power card. But he says that for the rest of the game, no cards can be added to or removed from that location. So he locks down a location, and you can essentially like immediately win those games. So I saw this card and I was like, okay, I want to play with this. Professor X is one of my favorite Marvel characters. I think he's a really cool character, very interesting in a world surrounded by physically powerfully characters. That this is a mentally incredibly powerful being. But what could I pair with this? He's an ongoing ability. So Jake mentioned these ongoing abilities. That's another archetype. So there's some ongoing abilities that let you, like Mr. Fantastic and another called Claw, that let you add power to a lane without playing to it because they add to the left or right. Claw just adds right, but Mr. Fantastic adds to the left and right. So you could like play Professor X, and if you're losing there, play those cards to boost your power up. Your opponent can't do anything about it because they can't play cards there. So that's good. So it kind of leaned to this strategy. And then the other cards I'm using are lots of ongoing cards that Jake's already previously mentioned, like Ant-Man, Spectrum, Punisher, just all the ongoing effects I could find to kind of lean into this other ongoing strategy that I can boost around. And that deck's a lot of fun. There's definitely some pieces. I'd love to have Onslaught for that deck. I have not unlocked that card yet. It'd be a natural fit. That I'd love to sub in. But besides that, I'm kind of doing either if it's a game where Professor X can work, I love playing that. It's really fun. If not, I'll just do the ongoing thing. Throw down Iron Man, try to win big. Iron Man doubles the power of a location. He's a really fun card that you get really early on.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like you have so much similar cards. Like that deck is like 75% the same as the first deck I mentioned, but just function totally differently. And I think
Yeah.
that's like a lot of what's like deck building in this is. It's like, okay, here's an obvious synergy with ongoing cards. How do I want to like add my twist to that to make it like fit with my play style or how I want to have fun in this game? And then a lot of like and then you also have the choice of like, do I just like go all in on that, or do I want to like kind of jam 2 archetypes together, and that can also work too.
Yeah.
So yeah, deck building in Marvel Snap, very fun. Let's briefly wrap up, as you mentioned, with the free to play, and then if we would recommend it.
Okay, so one bonus about Marvel Snap, the way that you're only matched with people who have similar card pools to you. So if people pay to unlock more cards, you're not typically playing against them as much. I find really refreshing and nice. I don't feel that if I'm not putting money into this app that I'm not getting a benefit. But I will say not just having access to the card pool on one hand is fun, on another hand is frustrating. I know that I'm hanging out in a Skinner box that's trying to give me rewards constantly. And on one hand, it's kind of driving me crazy, Jake. And on the other hand, I like I'm a simple man. I have my psychology is being taken advantage of, and I know this, and I kind of hate the game for it. But I've also played. I don't know how many hours you've played it in the week since it came out, but I've played too many.
I don't want to know, dude.
Yeah, I don't want to know either. So on one hand, the free to play is fun. It works really well in the game. It gives you pieces, so a meta develops slowly. It encourages deck building. There's lots of benefits to the way it's designed, and it's not designed pay to win, which is a real problem with free to play, right? Or pay to get ahead, or pay to whatever, right? To get a true advantage. There might be a tiny bit of that, but it's not. It doesn't feel meaningfully impactful.
Yeah.
But at the same time, psychologically existing in a game that is taking advantage of your psychology gets tiring. So for me, if this was a digital card game that I could buy and just kind of like have stuff doled out, but have that less emphasized, I think I would like it slightly more. Like it could be a 10. I just kind of don't like the free to play.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And we're not doing like a full review, right? Like there's other things that I could mention that I won't, but
yeah, I think like playing this game versus like I'm like pretty fiercely like I don't put money into free to play stuff. Like I could, like I could afford the $10 to like get access to more cards. And maybe I even should, as much as I've like played this game, right? Like I would have, I would probably have gotten plenty of value out of that, compared to like spending $10 in any other number of ways. But like for whatever reason, I don't know why my psychology just like doesn't typically allow me to do that. And this game, of all the digital card games I've played, of which like Legends of Runeterra and Hearthstone are the two big ones. Oh, Magic Arena, which is like the worst. You have to pay for everything in that game.
Pay to
Uh,
play,
uh,
but you pay every day.
yeah. Like this one definitely feels like
It's
I'm
reasonable.
playing the exact same game as anyone who bought the
Yeah.
pass, and
It's like Star Realms almost.
yeah, and I think the other thing where like the company, what is it, Second Dinner, like thoughtfully pushed back against the normal predatory model is you can't even buy the season pass that like gives you unlocks as you rank up until you complete like the first starter like
Yeah.
onboarding pass, which takes a couple hours, like
Yeah.
it doesn't let you just like pay right away. Like it kind of forces you to try before you buy in a way that I think is like pretty cool. Like they didn't have to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Though it is, yeah. I mean, I don't want to play devil's advocate. I really like this game. We're clearly both really excited about it. I think that we're going to continue playing. But my question is, Jake, do you recommend for the average decision space listener who's a member of our audience? I imagine a lot of people are going to listen to this episode who found it because of Marvel Snap and they're already playing it. That's awesome. But if you listen to Decision Space, you listen to this episode, Jake, do you say give it a try?
I do. I mean, like if you know that you are somebody who has a very addictive personality, like me and you, maybe
Yeah.
don't. Like,
Just know you're playing with fire.
yeah, you really are. And like for that reason alone, I'm just kind of like hesitant to just be like unequivocally like everyone should play this game because it's like free and it's fun. So why not? But like barring personal self restraint issues, like I think it's great. I think
Yeah.
it does some really just like great things with app design too that we haven't mentioned
Yeah.
related to gameplay. Like for one thing, I really love is that like it uses the vertical orientation of your phone. That just makes it
Yeah.
so much more comfortable in your hand to play, especially if you have like a giant oversized Android like I do. I don't know why I bought
Sure.
this, but I have it now. Like it, like there's something like it's just something so much more casual about just like holding it in a hand like I would a normal phone and like swiping and playing
Yeah.
versus like holding it like sideways and
Like a Switch.
like a
Yeah.
switch. Yeah, right. And, like it reads differently. It's just more comfortable. Also, like we
We
haven't
had
talked about like the cosmetic upgrade, which is like basically the currency you're getting, and like I think it's like it is like again, it's like bad for the brain worms, but it's kind of cool. Like you get to like
yeah,
upgrade your cards, and like they have some like really effective like 3D effects.
they're
That
cool.
like the first time you see it, you're kind of like wow. And my wife is even like I basically she like insists that I come to her to let her upgrade all my cards as I unlock them because she like loves it so much and just like she doesn't care about the game, but she finds that like very compelling.
My wife, I told Maya Jake about this game, and Maya said, "Oh, that sounds incredible." And like the kind of game I would stay up until 3 a.m. playing on my phone, so I'm definitely not going to download it.
Yeah.
And she's absolutely right. She would love it, and she's wiser than I. So I don't know what we're going to do, Jake. We both really like this game. I recommend it too. I think you should try it if you like card games. I think it offers a lot of new things. Even if you're not a fan of typical digital card games, there's a lot here. I think informed by the refreshing conciseness of board games that I think is why a lot of people love board games, mixed with things that could only work in digital. That's refreshing. It plays in 5 minutes. Jake and I could talk about this for. This is a problem. We wanted to keep talking.
Board gamers will by and
Like
large
this
find
game.
something
Yeah.
to like here. And this is also just like phase one. Like right now, like it feels like we're still playing just like the bare bones game.
Yep.
I
Yeah.
can't even play against Brendan right now. So I think also you can wait, and
Yeah.
theoretically the app, we know player to player games are
It's
coming.
coming.
There's
Cool.
no limited mode, which is going to be freaking awesome when that pops up. I assume it will pop up. I haven't heard an announcement about that, but I mean, Hearthstone had one.
Yeah.
There's no reason why this wouldn't have a little draft module or something like that down the line. So I fully expect it, and I think that would be really cool with this system too. So yeah,
I'm so Doctor Doomed. Oh no. Well, we're definitely going to be talking about this in our Discord.
Yeah.
We'll see if I don't know if we'll do another episode on Marvel Snap. We are pretty board game focused. We're going to be covering.
I don't think so. It might come up in like random conversation. It's a pretty interesting example, especially as we like compare it to like other apps and stuff. But yeah, I don't think people need to worry that like, oh, this is a Marvel Snap podcast now. But definitely if you're playing Marvel Snap incessantly like we are and want to like talk decks, right now we've got like 3 people, Brendan, me, and Joe, that have just been like in there constantly, and we would love to have some more people to bounce ideas off of if you're enjoying this game. And if you're new to the Decision Space podcast, definitely check out our Discord. You can find the link to that in the description of this podcast.
So next week, we're going to be covering Rajas of the Ganges. I always want, my brain is like, pronounce it with an H because it's Spanish, but it's not that way. It's just Rajas of the Ganges.
Isn't it Rajas of the Ganges?
Yeah, I don't know, Jake. We got to figure it out before next week. We also have Memoir 44, which could actually be next week. Jake and I have to talk about it. But those are upcoming games that we're covering on the show. If you want more Decision Space, you are listening to the Decision Space podcast, the podcast about decisions in games. That's awesome. If you're a new listener who found us through Marvel Snap, welcome. Thank you for joining. I bet there's more interesting conversations about games that would appeal to you here. We don't just cover board games, but talk about games generally. Check out our backlog. There's lots of episodes. We're coming up on 100 in the catalog, so we're really excited about that. You can find us on Twitter at DecisionSpa, S-P-A. We'd love to hear from you about Marvel Snap, the zany decks you're playing, or board games you wish we'd cover. And you could also find out more about the show on decisionspacepodcast.com. But until next time, do you have any closing final thoughts?
I gotta go play Marvel Snap. It's too late for me. It might not be too late for you, but
that's so. Should we snap the episode out of existence here to close?
Yeah.
Okay.
See y'all later.